I suppose I was probably about 7 when I decided I wanted to be a writer, because my parents got me a book called Timothy Turtle, and while its literary value and even suspense value weren't much, it still left me thinking, oh, that's the coolest thing to be, is a person who makes books. When I was 11, my mother got me a copy of a Robert Heinlein science fiction novel that completely polarized me toward the science fiction fantasy genre, and I still can't think of a plot that isn't that. I teach 1 day a week at the Orange County School of the Arts. I hope I'm teaching them things that I learned from older writers so that they in turn can become professional writers and one day pass it on again to a still newer generation. I told my wife that. The early and mid-1980s, James Blaylock and a guy named K.W. Jeter and I were all friends. We all wanted to write science fiction fantasy type books. I wrote The Anubis Gates. Blaylock wrote Homunculus. Jeter's previous book was Morlock Night. As it worked out, we all three of us had books published at roughly the same time that were set in Victorian London, or at least 19th century London, and which employed science fiction and fantasy plot devices. Other people had done this first, and these definitely were the stuff that we now call steampunk, but just because Blaylock and Jeter and I did it all at once and knew each other, it sort of has come to seem that if we didn't start it, we at least sort of christened it. In fact, Jeter did christen it. He wrote a letter to a magazine and said, we need a term for this stuff that me and Powers and Blaylock are writing, and cyberpunk was a popular term at the time. He said, so maybe we should call what we're doing steampunk. And since then, of course, the word has had a lot of currency.
Steampunk is kind of like Victorian, except instead of making electricity power, we move forward with steam power.
So you have all the fashion of that time mixed with the scientific knowledge of the future. It's kind of usually a dystopian society.
Steampunk manifests itself in a lot of ways. There's kind of like steampunk literature. It's in a lot of films. It usually kind of comes out in a sort of like a fashion sense. Like I've got this piece on my hat here, and this is sort of like a steampunk monocle. So I would say that these two here, probably the most authentically steampunk, noting all the brass and copper in these ones. This one's not too bad of an example.
It was the fact that we were all three doing the same thing at the same time, and that he laid that label on it, I think, that has led to the three of us being identified with steampunk. I mean, astronaut would be nice and Pope would be nice, but it seemed to me that none of them could compare with being a writer.